thing that Attorney General Horne said. And I think that provides the starting point for what is a fundamental difference between the way he sees America and the way I see America. The way he sees the Constitution and the way I see the Constitution. The way he sees the diversity of this country and the way I see the diversity of this country. It's fundamentally different ends of the spectrum. He talks about a government. He says the state can dictate and issue the finding he issued. I'm sorry, the state didn't issue a finding. One person did. One person who was in a position to exercise power from his own personal perspective. Tom Horne, hours before he was sworn in as Attorney General, signs for all of us a finding saying that ethnic studies, Mexican American studies, and TUSD is in non-compliance of HB 2281, a law that he promoted, that he advocated for, out of his own personal offense to this curriculum. He abandoned his respect of local control of our school board. He exercised the decision that he leaves on the hands of his successor, Mr. Huppenthal, and he, even as a lawyer, violates one of the most fundamental principles that exist. He issued a finding based on conduct exclusively that occurred prior to the statute even becoming effective. It's an ex post facto law. His finding certainly is an ex post facto finding, and they know that. They tried to tell us, essentially, you can't go on the freeway in excess of 75 miles an hour when the law said you could go 80. That's one of his big problems. It is, we have in law a war going on. It's a cultural war, and it has to do with a battle over the Constitution. How do you interpret it? Who does it protect? Is it a breathing, living document? Is it something that evolves with time and incorporates all of us and the circumstances that arise over time? Or is it a document that you go back to some fundamental interpretation of what it meant by the, quote, founding fathers? And even then, in Mexican American studies, see, they teach in that classroom, well, who are the founding fathers? Are they the founding fathers from the 13 colonies? Are they the founding fathers of all of the United States? Are they the founding fathers that are limited to those that were at Plymouth Rock? Are they the founding fathers that include those that came in to the Southwest? Does it include those that were the Native Americans who were here originally? You know, one of the books that Mr. Horne has pointedly taken offense at is Occupied America, a book that has been around for over 40 years, standard college text. Dr. Acuna is a product of our university, published by our university. And if you look at his book, one of the issues that has come up that Mr. Horne takes exception of, and I just want to offer this as one small exception, is the right to look at different events in our country and have a debate about it, and have different perspectives that allow students to think critically, to make their own decisions, and then to walk out and formulate their own belief system. See, his difference, the difference between his America and mine, is that in my America, I think you get to pick what you believe because you have developed critical thinking skills that have led you to a conclusion that is grounded in facts and critical analysis. My America doesn't say you take a position based on some dogmatic conclusion, some orthodoxy. I'm willing to take on the warts of our country, and not for the purposes of tearing down our country, but for the purposes of us going forward in a more enlightened way. That's what our Constitution is about. That's what our Constitution has always been about. That's what this case is about. We talk about the issue of race, and let me close on it. Educational decisions based on race. That's not what Brown said. What Brown said, and what the right has taken away from us, is this notion of a colorblind society, because they want to take that, and if you look back to the original founder, the person who promulgated that thought, as it came up in the in the pre and post Civil War era, the notion of a colorblind society was taken on in the time of the Civil War, and it was taken on to try and deal with the issue of slavery. And if you remember our Constitution, that we all feel so strongly about, our own founding document said that African Americans weren't equal. Our own founding document didn't even recognize Native Americans as citizens. We are a country that has learned from our mistakes and continue to make mistakes, but continue to have the opportunity to learn. Race, if this curriculum talk about race, certainly does. It talks about race not from the context of superiority. It doesn't talk about it from the context of one is better than another. But I will tell you, in closing, the difference between the two Americas that Mr. Horne and I are talking about, is see, I think that we have a country that allows us to embrace who we are, to revel in it, to be proud. My father was what is now called by the Republicans in the legislature an anchor baby. My grandparents were undocumented. They were in Los Angeles, and my father was born by chance, or maybe not by chance, in LA County. Made him a United States citizen. Shortly thereafter, my grandfather was deported. So the family returns to Mexico, and he grows up in Guadalajara and then in Nogales. At the tender age of 17, he's knocking at the door saying, oh, by the way, I have the documentation show I was born in the United States. I'm a citizen. I'm returning to my country of birth. By our 14th Amendment, it's his country of right to be in. He returns just prior to World War II, and he spends his life here as a proud Mexican, but as a contributing, hardworking leader in this state, giving his all to the day he died about bringing all that he had to give. Because what Mr. Horne fails to recognize is that for Mexicanos to be proud of being Mexicano, and for every group, doesn't mean you're not proud of being part of this country. It doesn't mean that if I retain my language, my culture, my history, my art, that I am doing it to the exclusion of anyone. I want my sons and my daughters and my grandchildren to be able to pick up the beautiful North and understand that story just as much as I want them to pick up any other novel or work of nonfiction that may be taught in our schools. What we give to this country, to each other. See, I want my sons to know about Tuskegee. and the intentional infliction of syphilis and untreated. I want my son to know and my daughters to know about the rounding up of the Japanese and to be able to think about, well, why were the Japanese rounded up in World War II and not the Germans? I want them to know about the cycle of deportations of Mexicans, that we're welcome when the labor is needed, but when the economy turns sour, please leave. Not to build resentment, but to understand the dynamic. And fundamentally to understand that if you don't become citizens, if you don't vote, if you don't get the leaders in place, you end up with the one person who thinks they are the state and they can impose their will on all of us. That's what this lawsuit challenges.
Strong term, and it's being used actually on both sides in this debate because Attorney General Horne views the ethnic studies programs themselves as racist. We just heard that. Richard Martinez's lawsuit is saying that the law that was passed targeting the ethnic studies program is itself racist. And in some ways, those labels, I think, don't encourage conversation. They're so strong. But what I'd like to ask Attorney General Horne is whether he agrees that for many, many years in this country, the teaching of history, social studies in the public schools was, in a sense, an ethnic studies program, but it was white ethnic studies because there was a lot that was left out. And whether this is simply an effort to fill in and to speak to the students in the way that Richard Martinez was talking about, to give all students a sense of pride in their heritage. Is that something we should be thinking about?
Yeah. I agree that history at one time left out the contributions of many groups. And if you look at the standards that we promulgated from the Department of Education, which I was integrally involved in, you will find many performance objectives that require all students to learn about the contributions of different groups. And you can go online at azed.gov and read the standards, and you'll see the performance objectives there that require that all students learn about the objectives of different groups. I am also in favor of students learning different viewpoints that will cause them to think critically. I'm passionately in favor of that. I've been a strong proponent, for example, of the Emmer series of history books, which present in each volume different essays taking contrary views about the same issue. I think that's a great way to teach kids, and I'm all in favor of learning substantively all the things that have been mentioned on the other side. But what you don't do in the United States of America is divide students by race. That is what I contend is racist, to divide students by race and say, you're African American, so you go in that class, you're Latino, so you go in that class, and teach them only about their own contribution. That's what's wrong. And it's not true that the curriculum just teaches pride and doesn't teach resentment of other groups. I pointed out they told people that white people are individualists and colored people are all group-oriented. That's right here in the curriculum. A totally racist generalization that does not recognize the fact that individuals are different from one individual to another. The curriculum has something called critical race theory, in which I quote directly from the curriculum given to the kids. Unlike traditional civil rights, which embraces incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundation of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment, rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. I'd like to ask my two friends here to tell me what's wrong with legal reasoning, enlightenment, rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law.
I'll rephrase that question.